The bells rang across the capital long after the sun had fallen. Gold light spilled from the palace windows, pouring onto marble steps worn smooth by centuries of kings and queens. The city below was alive, cheering crowds, raised banners, voices chanting the name of a man who had become prince only hours ago. A new era, they called it. Inside the palace, everything smelled of incense and polished stone. The air hummed with celebration, but beneath it ran something darker, an unease no one could quite name. At the center of the great hall stood the prince. He wore the crown like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His face was calm, unreadable, carved into stillness by years of preparation. But those who knew him well, the old guards, the servants who had watched him grow, could see it in his eyes. Something was wrong. The music faded. Conversations softened into whispers. A single command echoed across the hall, sharp and unexpected. "Clear the chamber." The nobles froze. No one disobeyed a crowned prince. One by one, silk shoes and armored boots retreated, until only a handful of guards remained, and her. The Queen Mother. She stood near the tall windows, hands folded neatly in front of her, posture perfect despite the long day. Silver threaded through her dark hair, catching the torchlight. She had watched him be crowned with tears in her eyes. Tears of pride. She smiled at him now, stepping forward as she had done 1,000 times before, ready to congratulate him, to touch his face, to remind him that no matter the crown, he was still her son. But he didn't move. "Mother," he said. The word came out colder than he intended. Her smile faltered. "Yes?" she asked gently. The guards shifted. They sensed it too, the shift in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. "You are to leave the palace," the prince said. "Tonight." Silence swallowed the room. The Queen Mother blinked, certain she had misheard him. "Leave," she repeated softly. "My son, the celebrations. You no longer have a place here." The words struck like a slap. Gasps echoed from the guards. One of them looked down, unable to meet her eyes. Another clenched his jaw, confused, uncomfortable. The Queen Mother took a step closer. "Is this a jest?" she asked, lowering her voice. "If I have offended you, you have offended the crown," the prince interrupted. His tone was sharp now, final. Her breath caught. For a moment, she searched his face, desperate for a flicker of the boy she had raised, the child who used to run through these halls, who used to crawl into her bed after nightmares, who once swore he would never let the world harden him. She saw none of it, only steel. "You will gather your belongings," he continued, "and you will leave before dawn. You are forbidden from returning." A whisper rippled beyond the doors. News traveled fast in palaces. The Queen Mother reached out, her hand trembling as it brushed his sleeve. "My son," she whispered, "please, look at me." He stepped back. That movement, small, instinctive, cut deeper than any blade. The guards moved forward at his signal. "No," she said, finally breaking. "Please, whatever this is, we can speak privately." The prince turned away. "Escort her out." The command echoed like thunder. The Queen Mother's composure shattered. Tears welled in her eyes, though she fought them fiercely. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin, refusing to give the watching walls the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. As the guards approached, she spoke one last time. "I loved your father," she said quietly. "I loved this kingdom. And I loved you long before anyone called you prince." His hands curled into fists. But he did not turn around. The palace doors groaned open, spilling cold night air into the hall. Torches flickered as she passed through them, her footsteps slow, dignified, each one echoing like a funeral bell. Outside, the crowd had thinned, but not disappeared. When they saw her, alone, escorted, crownless, the cheers turned to murmurs, then to shouts. Why is she leaving? What did she do? Is she being punished? She didn't answer. She didn't look back. The doors slammed shut behind her with a final brutal sound that rang through the palace and the city beyond. Inside, the prince stood motionless. The crown slipped from his head and struck the marble floor. He fell to his knees. The guards didn't move. They weren't supposed to see this. His breath came in ragged gasps. His hands pressed against the floor as if the stone itself might swallow him. Every muscle in his body trembled, the weight of what he had just done crashing down all at once. He hadn't pushed her out because he hated her. He had pushed her out because if she stayed, she would die, and the world could never know why. High above the palace, the bells kept ringing, celebrating a prince who had just sacrificed the one person he loved most. The night after the exile, the palace never truly slept. Torches burned low in their brackets, casting long shadows that crawled across the corridors like living things. Servants whispered instead of spoke. Guards walked slower, heavier, as if the stone beneath their boots had grown unforgiving. And in the highest wing of the palace, the new prince wandered alone. He had dismissed everyone. Advisors, physicians, even the captain of the guard. No one dared challenge him, not after what he had done, not after what he had become. He moved through the royal library in silence, his steps echoing faintly beneath the towering shelves. This was the one place in the palace untouched by celebration. No banners, no music, just dust, parchment, and memory. His mother had loved this room. She used to bring him here as a child, lifting him onto a wooden stool so he could reach the lower shelves, laughing when he pulled down books far too heavy for his arms. She told him knowledge was the sharpest weapon a ruler could wield. Tonight, that weapon was cutting him open. The prince stopped before a section of the wall that looked wrong. It was subtle, a barely uneven line in the stonework behind a shelf that hadn't been moved in decades. He had noticed it days ago, during a restless walk meant to quiet his thoughts. He hadn't meant to touch it, but something had pulled him closer. With a sharp tug, the shelf shifted. Stone scraped softly against stone, and a narrow compartment revealed itself, dark, hidden, deliberate. The prince's breath slowed. Inside lay a leather-wrapped bundle, tied with faded ribbon bearing the royal seal. His hands hesitated. He knew, somehow, that once he opened it, there would be no turning back. He untied the ribbon. Letters spilled into his hands, dozens of them. Official, clinical, stamped and signed by the palace physicians and sealed under strict confidentiality. He read the first line, then the second. Then he sat down hard against the floor. Terminal. The word repeated again and again across the pages, dressed in different language but never softened. Progressive. Irreversible. No known cure. His vision blurred as dates and signatures bled together. The letters were addressed to one person. The Queen Mother. The prince pressed the papers to his chest as if they might burn him. How long? He flipped through the stack with shaking hands. The earliest diagnosis was nearly a year old. A year of smiles. A year of advice. A year of watching him prepare for the crown, knowing she would never see him rule for long. She had carried it alone. Rage surged through him, hot and sudden. Rage at the physicians. At the council. At the kingdom that demanded strength while devouring its own. But most of all, rage at her. The door creaked behind him. He didn't turn. I wondered when you would find them, she said softly. Her voice was calm. Too calm. He spun around. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a dark cloak, her face pale but composed. She had aged 10 years in a single night. How long? He demanded, rising unsteadily. She met his gaze without flinching. Long enough. The prince laughed once, a broken, disbelieving sound. You were going to let me become prince without telling me you were dying, he asked. You were going to let me rule while you worried, she interrupted gently. While enemies watched for weakness. She stepped closer, lowering herself onto a chair across from him. This kingdom is balanced on a blade's edge, she continued. Your father held it steady. Now it is yours. I don't care about the kingdom right now, he snapped. I care about you. Her eyes softened. I know. That was the worst part. She reached for his hand, and this time he didn't pull away. They are watching me, she said quietly. Already. There are rumors. Whispers. If they see illness, they will use it. Against you. Against the crown. I can protect you, he said fiercely. I'll double the guard. You can't protect me from time, she said. Silence fell between them. Then she said the words that changed everything. "You must send me away." He stared at her. "No. Listen to me." "No," he repeated louder now. "I will not exile my own mother." "You will," she said, her voice firm. "Because if I remain here, I become a target. If I leave in disgrace, I disappear." He shook his head, pacing. "They'll hate me. Yes. They'll call me cruel. Yes. They'll say I betrayed you." She nodded. "And they will fear you." He stopped. "Fear. That is the shield you need right now," she continued. "A prince who can cast out his own mother is not one they will test easily." His chest tightened. "You're asking me to become something I'm not." She stood, stepping in front of him, cupping his face in her hands. "I'm asking you to become what the crown demands," she whispered, "and what a son sometimes must." His eyes burned. "And what happens to you?" A sad smile touched her lips. "I get time," she said. "Quiet. Peace. And the knowledge that you will survive." He pulled away. "I won't do it," he said hoarsely. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Then they will kill you first." The words landed like a blade. She pressed her forehead to his. "This is the only way," she said. "Promise me." He closed his eyes. Outside, bells rang, practice chimes for a coronation not yet complete. When he opened his eyes again, his world had narrowed to a single choice. Be a loving son, and a dead prince. Or be a monster, and let her live. "I promise," he said. Her breath hitched. She hugged him tightly, as if memorizing the shape of him. And in that moment, long before the guards, long before the shouting crowds, the exile truly began. When dawn came, the letters were returned to the wall. The shelf was pushed back into place. And the prince began rehearsing the cruelest performance of his life. The first attempt on his life came before the crown had even cooled on his head. It happened at dawn. The prince stood alone on the eastern balcony, watching the city wake beneath a sky stained pink and gold. From above, the capital looked peaceful, rooftops catching light, smoke curling lazily from chimneys, bells chiming the hour. It was a lie. He felt it before he heard it. A whisper of movement. The faint scrape of metal. He turned just as an arrow shattered against the stone pillar beside him, splintering into deadly shards. Another struck the railing where his chest had been a second earlier. He hit the ground hard. Guards flooded the balcony, steel flashing, shouts tearing through the quiet morning. Somewhere above, a shadow vanished across the rooftops. The assassin was never found. By midday, rumors spread through the palace like poison. The prince was weak. The prince was vulnerable. The prince could be tested. That night, the council gathered in the war chamber, faces tight, voices low. Maps were spread across the table, marked with red ink and coded symbols. "The attempt was clean," said the captain of the guard. "Professional. Not a rebel." "Foreign?" an advisor asked. "Or internal?" another replied. The prince listened without speaking. He already knew. If they were willing to strike this early, this openly, it meant they believed he could be broken. And if they believed that, then his mother had been right. After the council dismissed, he stood alone in the chamber, staring at the map until the lines blurred. The weight of the crown pressed against his skull, heavier than ever. He thought of her, exiled, alone, watching the same sunrise from some quiet estate far from the palace walls. Still alive. A servant knocked. "Your Highness," she said nervously. "There is a matter." She handed him a folded parchment. No seal. No signature. A warning. Weakness bleeds. Blood follows. His jaw tightened. They were watching. And they were waiting. That night, he summoned his mother in secret. She arrived cloaked and hooded, escorted through forgotten corridors meant for servants and ghosts. When she stepped into the candlelit room, she looked smaller somehow, frilier, but her eyes were sharp. "You shouldn't be here," he said immediately. "You were attacked," she replied. "I felt it." He scoffed softly. "You always do." She studied his face, the tension in his shoulders, the shadows beneath his eyes. "It's begun," she said. "Yes," he replied. And it won't stop. They sat across from each other, the table between them like a border neither wanted to cross. They're testing you, she continued, seeing how you respond. I'll double the guard, he said. Purge the court if I have to. And prove their point, she asked. Fear makes men sloppy. Desperation worse. Silence. Then she spoke the words he had been dreading. They must believe you are capable of cruelty. He looked at her sharply. They must believe, she continued, that love does not restrain you. That blood means nothing to the crown. His throat tightened. No. You saw what happens when they sense softness, she said. An arrow before breakfast. He stood, pacing. I will not turn myself into a tyrant. She rose too. You will turn yourself into a survivor. She reached into her cloak and withdrew a second parchment, thicker, heavier. Intel, she said. Names. Houses. Men who funded the attempt. He took it, stunned. You built this network, he asked. She nodded. I prayed you'd never need it. He scanned the list. Nobles. Generals. Men who had sworn loyalty days earlier. They'll strike again, she said. Sooner. Closer. He looked up at her. What do you want me to do? Her answer was immediate. Make an example. The words echoed in his mind long after she left. The next morning, the prince acted. He summoned the court. Nobles filled the great hall, murmuring nervously, eyes darting to the guards lining the walls. At the center of the chamber stood 3 men in chains, accused conspirators, dragged from their estates before dawn. One screamed his innocence. One begged. One stared straight ahead, defiant. The prince entered slowly, deliberately, each step echoing. He did not look at them at first. He looked at the room, at the fear, at the silence. An attempt was made on my life, he said calmly, by men who believed the crown was weak. He turned to the prisoners. They were wrong. He raised his hand. The executioner stepped forward. Gasps rippled through the hall. Wait, one man cried. Your Highness, my children. The prince didn't blink. Remove them. The executions were swift, public, unforgiving. Blood stained the marble floor where celebrations had taken place days earlier. By nightfall, the kingdom trembled. By morning, the whispers changed. The prince was ruthless. The prince was dangerous. The prince would destroy anyone who crossed him. From a distant estate, his mother listened to the news delivered by trembling messengers. She closed her eyes. He was becoming the monster they needed. But monsters don't sleep easily. That night, alone in his chambers, the prince scrubbed his hands raw beneath scalding water, unable to wash away the memory of their screams. He stared at his reflection, at the crown, the bloodshot eyes, the stranger staring back. This is working, he whispered. But his voice shook. Because every step he took towards safety pushed him further away from the man she had raised. And the worst part, the enemies were no longer testing him. They were planning something far worse. By the time winter reached the capital, the Queen Mother had become a ghost. Her name was no longer spoken in the palace halls, at least not aloud. When it was mentioned, it came wrapped in bitterness and rumor. She plotted against her own son. She tried to control the crown. She paid the price. The prince made sure those rumors were never corrected. From the outside, he ruled like a man carved from iron. Decrees were swift. Justice was unforgiving. Borders were reinforced, traitors vanished, and foreign courts learned to measure every word they sent him. The assassination attempts stopped. Fear worked. But fear exacted its own cost. Each night, the prince stood alone in his chambers, staring at the fire as it burned lower and lower. The room felt larger without her presence, without the quiet sounds of her footsteps, without the faint scent of herbs and parchment she always carried with her. Letters arrived for him every week, all unsigned, all written in a careful hand he knew too well. She never spoke of her illness, never complained. Instead, she wrote about the countryside, about birds nesting near the estate walls, about the strange peace of living without ceremony or guards. You would like it here, one letter said. The silence is honest. He never replied. Not because he didn't want to, but because responding would put her at risk. So he memorized her words instead. As winter deepened, so did the cost of his performance. A delegation from the southern provinces arrived one morning, demanding reduced taxes after a harsh harvest. The old prince, his father, would have negotiated. The new prince refused. The decision sparked unrest. Then riots. Soldiers were deployed. Blood followed. The court watched him carefully now, some with fear, others with hunger. Power attracts predators. And far beyond the palace walls, time was slipping away. At the estate, the Queen Mother's health declined faster than the physicians had predicted. Her hands trembled. Walking became difficult. Some mornings, she couldn't rise from bed at all. Still, she refused to return. "They must believe I am gone," she told her attendants. "Not hidden. Gone." She followed the news obsessively, every decree, every execution, every rumor of cruelty. Each report tightened something in her chest. What have I turned him into? One night, she collapsed while walking through the garden. The attendants carried her inside, fear written across their faces. The physician shook his head. "She has little time," he said quietly. Word reached the palace within days. The message came disguised as routine correspondence, coded, subtle. But the prince understood it instantly. His hands shook as he read. Weeks. Maybe less. That night, he shattered a goblet against the wall. Guards rushed in, startled. "Leave me," he snapped. They obeyed. He paced the room like a caged animal, fury and grief clawing at his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to ride out that very moment, to see her, to kneel beside her bed, to beg forgiveness. He didn't. Because the kingdom was watching. And because the plan only worked if he stayed the villain. Days later, a public procession wound through the capital. The prince stood on the palace balcony, cold and unmoving, as nobles paraded loyalty before him. Cheers rose from the crowd, but they were different now. Less joy, more fear. A child in the crowd asked his mother, "Why does the prince never smile?" She pulled the child closer. "Because smiling men are weak." The words struck him harder than any blade. That same night, a rebellion flared near the eastern border. Minor, contained, but symbolic. A test. The prince crushed it within days, sending a clear message. Mercy was no longer currency in his reign. From her distant estate, the Queen Mother heard the news and wept openly for the first time. Not for herself. For him. She wrote one final letter. This one was sealed. Not coded. Not hidden. A confession. She entrusted it to a single rider, an old guard who had once sworn loyalty to both mother and son. "If anything happens to me," she said, voice barely more than a whisper, "this must be delivered." The rider hesitated. "And if it reaches him too late?" She smiled faintly. "Then it will still reach the kingdom." As spring approached, the Queen Mother grew weaker. She could no longer walk unassisted. Her voice faded, but her mind remained sharp. On her last morning, sunlight spilled across her room, warm and gentle. She asked to sit by the window. "Do you think he hates me?" she asked softly. The attendant swallowed. "No, Your Grace." She nodded, satisfied. "That will have to be enough." Back at the palace, the prince stood before a mirror as servants adjusted his cloak for yet another council meeting. He looked older now, harder. A knock came at the door. "Your Highness," said the captain of the guard, his voice unsteady. "A rider has arrived." The prince's heart stuttered. "What news?" The captain hesitated. "From the North Estate." The prince dismissed the servants with a wave of his hand. The captain stepped forward, lowering his voice. "She is failing." The room seemed to tilt. "How long?" the prince asked. "Hours. Perhaps days." The prince turned away, gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles whitened. "Prepare my horse," he said. The captain froze. "My prince." "I said prepare my horse." A pause. Then the captain shook his head slowly. "If you go now, all of this unravels. They will know." The prince closed his eyes. He saw her face. heard her laugh, felt her hands on his hair when he was still small enough to need comfort. And he stayed. That night, the bells rang again, not for celebration, but for mourning. But no announcement was made. No black banners were raised. The Queen Mother died in silence, and the prince ruled on. The Queen Mother was buried without a name. No banners marked her passing. No bells rang from the capital towers. No court poet composed verses of grief. The official notice, issued days later, was brief and bloodless. The former Queen Mother has died in exile. The crown offers no comment. The kingdom accepted it the way kingdoms often accept cruelty, from a distance, with confusion dulled by fear. Inside the palace, the prince said nothing. He attended council meetings. He signed decrees. He listened to reports of borders secured and enemies silenced. He moved through his days like a man carved hollow, animated only by duty and momentum. At night, sleep abandoned him. He dreamed of doors slamming shut, of footsteps fading down long corridors, of a voice calling his name, soft, disappointed, proud. He never answered. 1 week after her death, the rider arrived. He was old, weather-beaten, and bleeding from a fresh wound along his ribs. Guards rushed him into the palace under cover of darkness, and within minutes, the prince stood before him. The rider knelt with difficulty. "I was told to give this to you," he said, pressing a sealed packet into the prince's hands. "Only if, only when." He couldn't finish. The prince already knew. He dismissed the guards and broke the seal. Inside was a single letter, written in her hand. His breath caught before he even read the first line. "My son, if you are holding this, then I have gone where crowns no longer matter." The words blurred as his vision filled with tears he had not allowed himself since the night of her exile. She wrote calmly, clearly, as if she had all the time in the world. She wrote of the illness, of the letters hidden in the wall, of the threats she had uncovered long before the arrow ever flew. She named names, explained alliances, exposed the conspiracy that would have torn the kingdom apart had weakness been revealed at the wrong moment. And then she wrote of him. "You did exactly what I asked," the letter read. "You bore the hatred so I could carry peace. I know what they will call you. I know what history will try to make of you." His hands trembled. "That is why this letter must be read." The prince collapsed into a chair. "Read how." The final paragraph answered him. "Do not defend yourself while I live. Do not correct them while I can still be used as a weapon. But when I am gone, when there is no longer danger in the truth, give it to the kingdom. Let them see what love sometimes costs." The letter slipped from his fingers. For the first time since the coronation, the prince wept openly. At dawn, he summoned the court. Nobles arrived uneasy, uncertain. Rumors had already begun to spread, of a dying rider, of sealed orders, of the prince's sudden silence. The great hall filled slowly. Every voice echoed. Every movement felt heavy. When the prince entered, he wore no crown. That alone stunned them. He stepped forward, holding the letter in his bare hands. "There has been a lie at the heart of my reign," he said. The court froze. "I allowed it," he continued, "because the truth would have killed us." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. He raised the letter. "This was written by the woman you believe betrayed the crown." A collective intake of breath. "She did not betray it," he said. "She saved it." And then, before anyone could interrupt, he ordered the letter read aloud. A herald's voice carried her words across the hall, steady at first, then shaking as the meaning unfolded. The illness, the threats, the choice, the request she had made of her son. Gasps turned to silence. Silence turned to grief. When the final line was read, no one spoke. Some nobles wept openly. Others bowed their heads in shame. One dropped to his knees. Outside the palace, the word spread faster than fire. By noon, the bells rang. Not the sharp, triumphant peal of coronation, but the slow, mournful toll reserved for fallen rulers. Black cloth was draped across statues that afternoon, not of kings, but of mothers. Candles lined the streets. People gathered in silence, clutching copies of the letter that had already been copied and recopied by hand. Love that had to look like cruelty. That was what they began to call it. By sunset, the prince stood alone on the palace balcony. Below him, the capital knelt. Every head bowed, every voice silent. He looked down at them, not as a ruler, not as a monster, but as a son who had survived the impossible. Behind him, the doors stood open. They no longer felt like barriers. He did not smile. But for the first time since the night he sent her away, he breathed freely. The kingdom would remember him as ruthless. But it would remember her as something greater. And somewhere beyond the reach of crowns and fear, a mother rested, knowing her son had finally been seen.